Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon for everybody. This is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Cole. In our podcast, we discuss with experts from different countries the people-centered approach for making our business. And today, we'll discuss the topic which I really like. What well-being program should you build which really could bring you a result? And why the typical well-being approach and well-being program don't work? And my guest today is Dr. Louise Lambert. Hi, Louise.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Happy to see you here. I know what you're a positive psychology expert, researcher with a deep understanding what has really helped people to be happier, healthier, and live their, I think, best life and be happy also at work, as we discuss not only the personal but also a business life. And I want to start with the first questions which we discussed in our meeting and preparing. It's why I know what you published an article, but why the typical well-being program don't work.
So we're just jumping right in, right?
Right. Yes, I think it's very interesting because of people. I know I usually hear a lot of presentations about different benefits that the companies usually do for the employees, and why this approach now is not so effective.
Yeah, and I think it's important to say that because I think sometimes it's like the little secret of the industry. And the reason, and I shouldn't say it's just my view or other people's views, but there was a great study that came out last year by Dr. William Fleming, and we'll give the listeners the citation. And what he found is that he looked at, I think, 200 and something different organizations across the UK. There was about 46,000 employees. And in short, his hypothesis is if we keep saying employee well-being programs work, we should be able to see a difference in well-being scores between employees who take part in these programs and those who don't. So he explored, and by the way, he took all of this data from the UK's equivalent of a great place to work. I think the UK has a slightly different name, but something like this. And that included well-being apps, mindfulness, resilience training, time management, the usual basket of things that we give employees. And again, looking at those who took part in these activities and those who did not. And what he found is that zero
Difference.
Absolutely, there's zero difference. Not only was there zero difference, in some cases, in 2 cases, for time management and resilience training, employees got worse.
Ow.
So yeah, and it's kind of like, and it was the data nobody really wanted to see, but I think it confirmed what many of us have the experience of seeing every day in workplaces where so much money gets spent on all sorts of programming for employees. And we kind of think, did that really do anything? And what I liked about this study is that this was able to really look at measures of well-being for these organizations. And these are the ones that do measure it. Most organizations don't even measure anything. So I think this study was really important in showing us a few things. One, when you are giving programming at the employee level, and that's really what we're here to talk about today, that is not as effective, and we'll talk about why in a moment. But 2, if you're not measuring anything, there's an awful lot of money being wasted. And 3, and I just want to add this one tiny little detail because I think it's an interesting one and it comes from his study. So in the 2 cases, employees got worse, time management, resilience, but in only 1 case, employees got better. And that category was for volunteering. And that's interesting because generally in employee well-being, we don't even think of volunteering. That usually goes in the CSR bucket, not the well-being bucket. But that was the only intervention where employees' well-being increased. So for those of you listening today, this is your takeaway. Maybe we should consider volunteering, but also, are we measuring? the outcomes of these programs, initiatives, webinars, services, everything that we're offering and spending a lot of money on. And if we're not, what are we basing these decisions? So that's in part, what kind of brought on this question of, gosh, what are we doing? And is what we're doing actually working?
I think you as a researcher, after this article, I think you asked yourself, why? Why this program and the usual way companies do them doesn't work?
Yeah. So 2 reasons. So one, and these were kind of the conclusions of that study, and it's a really obvious one, and it really, I think, has been changing what people do, and thankfully it is. So the reasons that researchers said these things don't work is because that's not where the problem is. So we keep thinking employee well-being is about employees, that somehow if they were more relaxed, if they were less stressed, and I'm not saying that is not true to a degree, okay, but why are they stressed? Because it's about work. And so if we're not tackling work, then any of these other activities that we're promoting are very unlikely to change the conditions for which well-being is needed in the first place. And so said otherwise, if the problem is work, then the solution needs to be about work. Because it's very rare. I have never seen this where people are hired angry, depressed, anxious, burnt out, resentful, but they sure do become that way. And when they do, that tells us, unless you're very, very, very bad at hiring, statistically speaking, that's not quite possible, but then the problem has to be work. And so that's issue number 1 of why these programs often don't work, because they're not about work. But issue number 2, and this is where our research has come in. So we've just written a paper. It's almost on the point of being published, but you know how long publishing takes. And what we looked at was how these programs are communicated. And I've been seeing this in my own work as well. So that kind of spurred this research question. But it's the notion of, how do we explain these programs to employees? How do we determine where's the problem? Who is the problem? Why? Like, where is this problem located? And that really matters. So the communication piece. So in our study, we looked at the attributions. Attributions, just fancy word for the reasons why, or the reasons employees gave for why their companies offered them well-being programs. So in this particular sample, these employees had been offered physical well-being, mental well-being or psychological well-being, career well-being, and what was the other one? Financial well-being. And then we asked them, like, why? Why does your company give you this? And then they could select from a number of different options. So some of these options were, my company cares about me. My company really cares about my well-being, or my company's just trying to save money. My company's trying to reduce healthcare costs. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way, but it was seen as, you don't really care about us. You're just trying to save money. Another reason was they're trying to get more productivity out of us. So here are organizations that are giving all of these programs, well-meaning, costing a lot of money. And then employees are saying, really? And so on the one hand, it's meant as something good, but it's being received as something bad. And so the outcome, what we found is that for financial well-being, career well-being, no problems. Employees actually really like those and they benefited from them. Psychological well-being, same. They really liked having access to an EAP, a psychologist, information about, just coping, stress, helping them manage their lives. But physical well-being was actually perceived quite negatively. And employees were like, this is a way for us to be more productive. This is a way for us to work harder. This is a way for us to, make more profit for the company. They saw themselves as, little hamsters on the treadmill, and they were not they were not received with the same positivity with which they were given. So this was quite eye-opening for us in the sense that I don't think when we think about implementing employee well-being programs, we generally don't think of the communication piece beyond, hey, here's an email, join us today in the cafeteria on Tuesday at 12, but it really matters. And I've seen that in two other big projects that I worked with. And in one case, the communication was not great. And it was just come in Tuesday at 12 and do your stuff. But there was no explanation of why are we doing this? And what does employee well-being mean? Is it, again, a way to get more productivity? Is it a way to punish us? And some employees actually felt that way. Why am I being forced to go to these courses when I have all this work to do? Like it felt like extra classes, at school. There was no communication around why some people had to go, but not other people. So immediately creates these perceptions of inequality, unfairness, like what's going on. It actually raised suspicion. People were very suspicious. People became very cynical. Like it had the total opposite outcome that we were looking for, despite the fact that the program was magnificent, but the communication ruined it. And then in another program, just to contrast, totally the opposite. Leadership said, this is what we see is happening. And it's actually our fault. So they took responsibility. They owned it. And they said, as a result, here's what we're going to do in terms of behaviors. We're going to have our own classes. We're going to have our own homework. Here are the things that we're going to change. And every time they changed something, that was communicated. So it wasn't sort of dumped on employees as individuals to figure out. And the assumption also wasn't, well, well-being is something in your head. You go get fixed. But rather it was, this is a shared responsibility. And if we're all feeling this way, something's gone wrong in our workplace and we have an obligation to change that. So let us take the first steps. And then, we each have a part to play, but it's primarily ours. So again, the way in which employee well-being is communicated, why, who's responsible, what it's going to look like, how it came to be that way, who will be held accountable for outcomes and scores. All of these things matter as much as, if not more, the program itself.
I'm totally agree with you. I think and also the explanation, as you mentioned, what is well-being and why is important for you. We know it as a positive psychologist to know why should they focus on a different side of our life as a balance important for our happiness, but usually people doesn't know it. So the company forget to educate our employees, to help them to redesign their life. And I totally agree. It's also the part of communication, the part of education. I think it's these two ways. And it's interesting. It's one of the typical problem. We create a great program, but
and then
forget
no one shows up.
Yes, don't tell about this. And it's much worse than the example, the leaders don't participate and the signals what this is not so important. This is for employees, not for us. It's, I think, else also. I want to ask you maybe any other typical problems, typical mistakes that you saw during your work, which the company also have when we start preparing, launching, manage, develop their well-being program. What could you tell about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So a couple of things. One is that we forget, again, people don't come to work feeling bad just on their own. Work conditions often fuel that. So people might be, really happy outside of work and then they get to work and think, so again, where we place well-being and whose responsibility is it really makes a big difference. And to date, most organizations place it inside the heads of employees instead of in the spaces in between. And I'm not saying I'm the only one who does this, but it's kind of pushing back and saying, hold on, let's leave the individuals alone and let's start looking at what is happening in the spaces in between, but also what is happening at work, through work, the work itself. And let's start there, because that's going to fix a lot of things. So this could be a workload, obviously, but also thinking about fairness. Who is doing all the work? Sometimes in a team, it's like two people holding the biggest weight and everybody else is, not, or not as much. Sometimes it's in communication. It's not, sometimes there isn't any, but sometimes it's just simply how things are getting communicated and not so much an absence of communication. Sometimes it's workplace incivilities. We don't talk about this enough. And this is really, how people treat one another. Do people feel respected and seen and heard and as though they actually matter? And that counts for a lot. So, I think it's thinking about, if you're going to put together an employee well-being program, first of all, I'd remove the word employee and I just call it a well-being program, because that removes the responsibility on individuals and it puts it back on the workplace. So that's one thing I would do, is how are we understanding well-being? Is it just, people need to sleep more? And I'm not saying that's not important, but if that's all you're doing, you're missing everything about work. The second thing I think we need to do, ask employees. It always baffles me when they're never consulted, and yet it's going to be a program for them. And managers and senior leaders and directors. It applies to everybody. But we end up offering what vendors have to sell versus asking employees, tell me what a good day looks like here. And that's an important question, because that tells us what to do more of. So sometimes people will say, I just like people I work with. Like, that's good. That means social capital, relationships, a feeling of belonging, feeling seen and heard. Like, that's important. So how do we continue to foster relationships? I think it's equally a good question to say, tell me what's a bad day around here. Because I'm certain nobody says, well, you guys don't offer yoga. Nobody's going to say that. But instead they're going to say, hey, Mary over there, she's rude to everybody. Or there's like zero flexibility. We're locked in from 9 to 6 p.m. and my kids get out of school at 4. I could come in at 8, but I'm not allowed to. So sometimes these solutions are even easier than we think they are, but we never take the time to actually just ask the question and say, what would help you have a better day? And sometimes these solutions are easier. Sometimes these solutions are even cheaper than an employee well-being program.
So interesting. I also think what's the part of a solution, as you mentioned, it's redesigning our workplace. I remember when during the pandemic, a lot of companies start to talk about burnout. The burnout, it was a problem until the pandemic. During the pandemic, a lot of companies start to talk about this. And from my side, I met some very interesting situation. Then they have a big problem is workplace during the organization, the process of work. So the people was overloaded, as they were overwhelmed with different programs. And the company said, could we make a mindfulness training for them for more relaxed? It doesn't work. I remember what I told it. It doesn't work. You should redesign your work process for helping your employee. And after that, you could implement something issues could help them to feel more relaxed and more happy.
If I can make a point on that, and it just reminded me of a hospital I worked with during COVID, and that exact thing happened. So of course, healthcare workers were overloaded and stressed, and they were pulling extremely long hours, in addition to the fear of, getting COVID, but also seeing people die. I mean, it wasn't good. And so leadership did the same thing. They're like, here's some mindfulness classes. And I remember one nurse, like literally threw her stuff on the ground. She was so angry. She started to cry, but she was right. She said, I don't need more money in this day. In my 20 whatever hour day, am I going to fit in an extra, however many minutes of mindfulness? What I need is for you to come and see me after my shift and tell me you believe in me. And I love that comment. And I bring it up often because it really speaks to the fact that what people need often is to feel seen. That's it. And when you feel seen and what you do matters and somebody actually noticed and somebody can see you're not doing well and maybe somebody comes and just gives you a hug and says, you know what, we're here. That right there is worth gold. It costs nothing. It takes 20 seconds and that is more meaningful than what this mindfulness course would have cost. So I think sometimes it's just listen to what people are telling you. They're telling you every day what they need.
Mm-hmm. And I totally agree. And also to added when the employees feel themselves, well, the company do this program for its reason, not for them. And it's very interesting. I remember 10 years ago, a lot of companies who talked about little bit programs, who talked about, as you mentioned, like save our costs, especially healthcare. And the employee listened and understand what the company designed this program to avoid additional costs, not for improving their really well-being. And also we try to invest in benefits without changing our attitude to do work, our leadership style, our culture. Usually, a lot of programs could be failed. What do you think about redesigning the workplace? What it really helps employees to feel themselves more comfortable, more happier, and I think it's one of the reasons why the Rebel program start work for the company's goal.
Absolutely. So one of the organizations I'm working with now, so we kind of came in and said, here's what we can do. And they're like, okay, which I love because you work there. I don't work there. Right. So we kind of walked through it at all different levels and we ended up basically redesigning the whole program to be able to help them redesign work. And instead of just dealing with one layer of managers, which is good because managers hold 70% of the influence over employee well-being. So if you're going to do one thing, fix that one layer. But managers are stressed from the level up. And then they're stressed from the level up. And there's, right, like it starts here. And when I say it starts there, I don't mean to blame the person at the top. But what I mean is when things are communicated and distributed all the way down, they change form, they accumulate weight, they speed up, and they land at the bottom with a resounding thud. And so what we have ended up looking at is instead of going this way, we literally went this way and we looked at all the spaces in between, the spaces in between the links to look at what happens there. So it left this office and then got to this office, but somehow it became 3 times bigger, 6 times more urgent. And now suddenly everybody's like, and then it just kind of rolls down. So we tried to go up as high as we could to get that layer to think about how is it that the work leaves this office in a different form than how it gets received to the next office. So what is happening to the sense of urgency? How are things being communicated? Again, respectfully, or is it a shouted order? Are your timelines realistic? Do people have enough resources? Is there enough, so we just kind of went through almost like a bit of a checklist, but to have them think about, it's not the person at the bottom who just can't deal with stress, but this comes from somewhere. And so I think when we talk about redesigning work, that is exactly where we need to be looking at so that people don't feel stressed, burnt out, resentful, angry, anxious, and just otherwise not great. But I think in addition to redesigning some of that work, it's also thinking about relationships. And when you ask people, what's the worst part about your day? Okay, workload and a bunch of stuff. But often they will say, it's relationships. It's the way we talk to one another. It feels disrespectful. You get an email at 10 p.m. at night. That's disrespect. Or you get a timeline that's big, but only because somebody didn't do their work 3 weeks ago. And now suddenly it's your urgency. Okay. Is also disrespectful. So part of that work is also thinking about, again, the spaces in between. How are we treating one another? When you're sending that email, you just want to get something done, but what does it feel like to the person getting it on a Friday night? It's a very different experience. So sometimes it's little tiny changes in how we work, how we talk. Other times it's thinking about, does everybody need to be at this meeting? Does this stuff all actually need to be done? Or is it the manager who's feeling like, I must be perfect. I'm going to get all this done. But maybe none of the other managers are doing it. So why are you doing it? Right. So it's kind of also kind of setting expectations a little bit, or at a minimum, having conversations about how are we going to work to at least make sense and understanding why we're doing this in the first place.
Liz, thank you for sharing so different, very important ideas. And I want to ask you to sum up the end of our conversation. To sum up and give your advice. 3 main steps which every company, every leader should do for creating and launching really working a well-being program or creating a well-being culture. What 3 main tips could you give to the leaders?
Okay, 3 main tips. Gosh, I should have written these down. Okay. One is why. Why are you doing this? And so a well-being program should be able to answer why, what, who, how, and those questions should also be asked of employees to help you answer those questions. And if you can't answer those questions, do nothing, because it's just going to be wasting money. So that's 1. 2 is to think about emotions, how employees feel. That's what makes employees stay. That's also what makes employees quit. And so the experience of work needs to be good. And I don't mean good like pizza parties and yay, having fun all the time, but is it respectful? Is it kind? Is it interesting? Is it pleasant? Is it meaningful? That actually matters to people, and that's what makes people stay. So we can design experiences at work, including work, to be a little bit more positive. And the third one, gosh, I don't remember. What should be a good third point? What did you get out of today?
I think you mentioned so many things from my side. I thought about communications, about leadership styles, about respect to other people. So I could add to your 3 tips to more focus to the culture, leadership culture, and redesigning the work. It helps you to improve effectiveness of a well-being program.
Perfect. Let's go with that.
Yeah. Yes. Thanks a lot for sharing your provocative, I think, ideas, provocative insights. The first, I think it helps the organization to start to think, what does it mean, happiness and well-being at work, and how it connected with real life of employees, the real work, the culture, and it really could have huge impact.
Thank you so much.
The companies.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for participation. And this is podcast Happy at Work. My name is Tatiana Koval. Stay connected.